The War Council chamber on the Vecthari command ship was cold the way important rooms always are. No decoration. No warmth. Just maps on every wall and the steady hum of machines that never stopped working. High War Master Doravayan stood at the central table. He was tall, with gray-green skin and eyes that had watched 40 years of war pass like weather. He did not move much when he was thinking. That was how his officers knew he was thinking hard. The intelligence packet in his hands was 63 pages. He had read packets like this hundreds of times before. Colony border dispute. Human settlement on the outer rim. 2 armies on standby. Standard operation. He was not worried. He turned to the section labeled, Special Forces Designation, Tier 1 Units. It was 3 pages long. He read it once. Then he read it again. He set the packet down on the table. His officers waited. The room was quiet enough that the engines of the ship sounded very loud. Add Battle Group 7 to the operation, he said. One of his officers looked up from his display. War Master, our current strength is already more than sufficient for. Add it, Doravayan said. He picked the packet back up and kept reading. For days before the Vecthari moved, Firebase Call sat on the edge of the colonial border like something someone had started building and then forgotten about. It was 3 structures, a perimeter wall with 2 sections that leaned slightly inward, and a broken armored vehicle that had not moved under its own power in 6 weeks. The replacement part for the left tread had been requested twice. It had not arrived. 11 soldiers lived there. Master Sergeant Connor Boyle was eating reconstituted eggs at a folding table near the window when Captain Kayla Briggs walked through the door. He did not look up right away. The eggs were not good but they were hot, and he was working through them the way a man does when he has decided that the meal is going to be finished regardless. Briggs set a tablet on the table beside his cup. On the screen was a satellite map of the border region and a lot of red position markers. Connor looked at it. He picked up his coffee. He drank some. How many? He said. 2 full armies, Briggs said. Possibly more. We are still working on the count. Connor nodded slowly. He went back to his eggs. Staff Sergeant Lena Morse was in the corner of the room, writing in her notebook. It was dark green with a rubber band around the cover that she took off and put back on many times throughout each day. She did not look up when Briggs came in, but her pen slowed down. She had heard everything. Specialist Eli Ruiz was outside, sitting on an empty supply crate in the pale afternoon light, recording a voice memo on his personal comm unit. He was 22 years old and from Albuquerque, and he sent his mother voice memos every few days because she did not like reading text messages. He was telling her about the sky on this particular moon, which turned a strange deep purple in the evenings that he had not seen anywhere else. He did not mention the red markers on the map. Briggs had not shown it to him yet. Corporal Owen Hart was in the medical bay, which was really just a curtained section of the second building separated from the rest of the room by a folding screen. He was reorganizing his supplies in a specific order that was not the order they had come in and that only made complete sense to him. He was singing something low and without a clear melody under his breath. He always sang when he was getting ready for something. Nobody in the unit ever asked him what the song was. Briggs gave the full briefing at 1,700 hours. She put the map on the wall display and walked through the numbers and the estimated movement timeline without softening any of it. That was one thing Connor's unit valued about her above almost everything else. She showed them exactly what the situation was and let them think. Eli Ruiz asked how long they had before first contact. Briggs said 4 days. Maybe 3. Lena Morse wrote something in her notebook. She did not ask a question. Owen Hart raised his hand and asked whether the resupply request for medical-grade antiseptic had been approved yet. Briggs said she would follow up. Hart said thank you and put his hand down and kept listening. Connor asked about reinforcements. Briggs said there was a full battalion 2 days out. She said they were a good unit. Connor nodded once. 2 days out meant they would not be at the firebase when the Vecthari arrived. Everyone in the room understood this without it being said. Nobody said it. After the briefing, Connor took his paperback novel outside and sat on the steps of the first building. The spine was cracked from too many openings and closings. He was using a gas station receipt as a bookmark, from a small place in Savannah that sold boiled peanuts and lottery tickets and had gone out of business 2 years ago. He kept meaning to replace the bookmark. He never got around to it. He read for a while. The sky was starting its slow change into purple. On the Vectary command ship, Intelligence Officer Seville was writing his first report. He had been assigned to observe and analyze the human defensive forces at Firebase Call in full. It was a clear assignment. He had done similar work 11 times before on different operations. He was very good at it. Seville was precise with his language. He did not write down things he was not certain about. He described what the surveillance data showed and drew conclusions that the data supported. He had been doing this long enough to know where the edge of the data was and to stop before he went past it. He had reviewed the surveillance footage of Firebase Call for 12 hours straight before writing a single word. The footage showed 11 humans going about a normal day. They ate. They maintained equipment. They slept in shifts. One of them ran laps around the inside of the perimeter wall every morning before the others were awake, without being told to. One sat on a crate outside and talked to someone through a personal comm device, laughing occasionally at his own words. One sat on steps in the evening with a paper book. Seville watched it all twice through. Most of his first report was standard. Troop count. Estimated weapons capacity. Structural gaps in the Firebase perimeter. These were the categories he was assigned to analyze, and he did it with care. But at the end, after all the data and all the numbers, he added 3 sentences that were not standard. He wrote, "The humans were briefed on our approach at approximately 1,700 hours local time. Surveillance footage of their activity in the 2 hours following the briefing showed no significant change in behavior. One soldier returned to reading a physical book on the exterior steps of the main structure. I am flagging this observation not as a tactical concern but as a behavioral data point that I do not currently have a classification for." He sent the report. He sat in his chair for a while after sending it. Then he went back to the footage and watched Connor Boyle read in the purple evening light. Unhurried. Turning pages at a regular pace. 2 Armies 4 days out. Seville watched for a long time. He did not write anything else that night. Doravayan reviewed the final deployment orders before going to rest. Everything was in order. The force distribution was good. The timeline was solid. He had done operations like this more times than he could count, and they had all gone the same way. He pulled up the 3-page Special Forces section one last time. He read through it a third time, more slowly than before. Then he closed the file and went to rest. But he set his waking signal 40 minutes earlier than usual. He did not stop to think about why he had done that. He just slept. The assault began at 0300 local time. The Vectary came in 3 waves. The first wave was 400 soldiers with armor units on both flanks and air support circling overhead. Rank Commander Frau had run this kind of operation 18 times across 6 different planets. He knew exactly what it looked like when everything was working. He expected it to work. The first sign that something was wrong was not an explosion. It was a silence. Wave 1 moved to their assigned positions. They were on time. They were in tight formation. Every unit was exactly where the operational plan said it would be, moving at exactly the planned speed. Frau stood at his forward command post and watched his displays and waited for the Firebase defenses to respond the way defenses always responded, with heavy fire from fixed positions that his soldiers could identify, map, and move around. The defenses did not respond from fixed positions. The defenses responded from everywhere. Connor Boyle had been up since midnight. He had moved his 11 people into 5 positions before the Vectary first wave crossed the perimeter sensor line. Not the positions that looked right on a map. Not the positions a trained military planner would draw up when reviewing the Firebase layout. These positions were strange. They were awkward. 2 of his soldiers were lying flat in an irrigation channel on the east side of the compound that smelled like chemical runoff and had not been cleaned since the Firebase was built. One of those soldiers was Lena Morse. She had accepted the assignment without changing her expression. Before climbing in, she took her notebook out of her jacket pocket and put it inside a waterproof pouch and put the pouch back inside her jacket against her chest. Eli Ruiz was at a position that existed in a gap between two supply storage structures on the north side. It was not on any tactical map as a firing position because it was not comfortable, it did not have a clear field of retreat, and it required lying at a strange angle to use effectively. But it gave a clean line of sight across 200 meters of open approach ground on the most likely avenue of advance. Eli's hands were steady. He had expected them to shake. He had thought about this in the days before, lying on his bunk, that his hands would shake and that would be the thing that defined him in this moment. His hands did not shake. He noticed this and filed it somewhere and stopped thinking about it. There was too much else to pay attention to. Owen Hart was in the back of the medical building with his kit organized and ready. He was also singing. Low, under his breath, the tuneless half-melody he always fell into when the work ahead was serious. Wave 1 hit the outer perimeter and ran into a problem they could not immediately name. The firebase was not defending itself according to the model. The model had been built from sound intelligence, perimeter structure, weapons loadout, troop count. The model was not wrong about any individual fact. The model was wrong about how the individual facts would behave in contact. Every time Frau's advance identified a defensive position and moved to suppress it, the position was already empty. Every time his flanks pushed to cut off a retreat lane, there was no one retreating in that direction. The firebase was not holding a line because it was not defending a line. Connor had no line. What he had was a problem he was feeding to 400 people one piece at a time, in a different shape every few minutes, in places that cost the advance more time than ground to deal with. Frau's timeline fell apart at minute 19. At minute 31 his east flank reported contact from a position that should have been behind them. At minute 43 he stopped the advance and stood at his command display and looked at the shape of the engagement and tried to find the logic in it. Not because he was panicking. Because Frau was a careful, disciplined officer and finding the logic in an engagement was what careful, disciplined officers did. He could not find it. He called for the optics feed on the north sector. In the north sector, Eli Ruiz was moving. Frau watched the feed. Eli went from one position to the next in a pattern that Frau's tactical training told him should not work. The timing was wrong. The angles were wrong. The decision about when to move and where, which in Vecteri doctrine required a completed threat assessment before any action, was being made at a speed that meant the assessment either was not being completed or was being run in a way Frau had never seen before. Every move landed. Every position Eli vacated became dangerous seconds after he left it. Every position he arrived at opened a new problem for the advance. Frau watched for 90 seconds. Then he kept watching. He stood at the display for 11 minutes without issuing a single order. His second officer asked him twice if everything was all right. He did not answer either time. He kept watching Eli move and tried to find the framework in it and could not, and that gap between what he was seeing and what his 40 years of training had built him to see sat in his chest like something swallowed wrong. His second officer stopped asking. At some point in the engagement, Owen Hart left the medical building. He should not have done this. His assignment was the medical building. The assignment existed for clear reasons and Hart understood every one of them. He had helped design the position assignments. He knew his role. He left because Eli had taken a hit, not a killing hit, not even a serious hit, but enough to slow him down and enough that Hart could see from the medical building window that Eli's movement pattern had changed and was going to get worse. Hart picked up his kit. He did not pick up a weapon. He never carried a weapon on the field if he could avoid it. He had made this choice a long time ago, in a different engagement on a different planet, and the reasons for it were not something he talked about. He had simply decided what he valued most and organized himself around that decision. He moved across open ground. The engagement was still very much active around him. He reached Eli. He worked. He was singing the whole time. A Vecteri soldier had a clear shot from 30 meters. The soldier had been trained for years. The shot was not a difficult shot. The soldier did not take it. He stood with his weapon up and watched Owen Hart work and sing and then help Eli back to a covered position, and then the moment had passed and Hart was gone, and the soldier stood there for a few seconds more before returning to the advance. This moment would appear in Sievel's fourth report, flagged and underlined, with a note that said, "I interviewed this soldier for 2 hours. I am still not certain I understand what happened." The Vecteri withdrew at 0611. Frau gave the pullback order in a flat, even voice. His officers executed quickly and cleanly. Nobody asked questions. The withdrawal was orderly, which was the only thing Frau could control at that point, and he controlled it with both hands. The firebase held. Dawn on that moon was long and orange and unhurried. By the time the light had fully come up, the ground outside the perimeter was quiet and Connor's unit was moving through their positions one by one, checking everything, accounting for everyone. Eli Ruiz sat down on the ground in the north sector when they cleared it. Not because of his injury. The injury was minor and Hart had dealt with it. He sat down because his legs made the decision before he did, just stopped, after everything, the way a machine sometimes does when the work it was built for is suddenly finished. He sat there for 2 minutes. Then he stood up and went back to work. Lena Morse climbed out of the irrigation channel. She was covered in chemical-smelling mud from her boots to her collar. She did not react to this. She reached into her jacket and took out the waterproof pouch and took out the notebook and opened it and wrote 3 lines, standing right there in the mud. Connor Boyle walked back to the first building. His paperback novel was where he had left it on the steps, a little dusty from the night but otherwise fine. The receipt bookmark from Savannah was still in it. He put it in his pocket for later. On the command ship, Doravayan received the casualty report at 0700 and read it without moving for a long time. 30% losses in Wave 1. Frau's withdrawal. 0 breach of the firebase perimeter. He sat at his table and looked at the numbers. Outside the viewport the moon turned slowly. The firebase was visible at this distance only as a small cluster of low structures on a flat 10 plane. It looked like nothing. It looked like the kind of place nobody would choose to be. He pulled up Sievel's first report. He found the last 3 sentences and read them again. Then he opened the deployment orders for the Second Army. He looked at them for a long time. He did not sign them. He closed the file. He would open it again tomorrow. He told himself that was the reason he was closing it now. He would look at it again with fresh attention tomorrow morning. He closed it and did not think about the 11 sentences in the Special Forces section that he had now read 4 times. He did not think about the men on the steps reading a paper book with 2 armies 4 days away. He closed everything and sat in a quiet room on a very large ship and did not think about any of it at all. The refusal did not come with shouting. That was the part Doravayan's senior officers found hardest to sit with. Frau filed his refusal at 0900 on the morning after the withdrawal. It was 7 pages long. Every sentence was orderly and precise. Every conclusion grew naturally from the one before it. There was no panic anywhere in the document. There was no desperation. It read the way a very careful technical report reads, like someone who had examined a problem from every available direction, found that all directions led to the same place, and had written down what that place was. The place was, he would not lead another assault on Firebase call. Doravayan read the 7 pages twice. He called his senior command staff into the main briefing room. He put Frau's document on the table and told them to read it. They read it in silence. When the last officer finished, nobody said anything for a while. One of them said, quietly, "He was always reliable." Doravayan said, "He still is." Nobody asked what he meant by that. They all understood what he meant. Frau had been a rank commander for 19 years. He had fought on 6 different planets. He had received the Empire's highest military honor twice in his career and had never been passed over for a promotion he was eligible for. His psychological fitness review, which was updated every 2 years, consistently described him as stable under pressure, decisive in chaos, and trustworthy with the lives of the soldiers under his command. None of that had changed. That was what made it so hard. If Frau had broken down, or become irrational, or submitted something that rambled and made no sense, it would have been easier. There were procedures for that. There were ways to process that kind of thing. You reviewed the officer's fitness, you provided support, you reassigned and moved on. Frau had not broken down. His 7 pages were the most logical thing anyone in the command structure had produced since the engagement. That was the problem. That was precisely the problem. Doravayan did not punish him. He moved Frau into a non-combat analysis position pending formal review, which was the correct procedural step, and he did it without any announcement or ceremony. He did not want the refusal to become a story that spread through the fleet. It spread anyway. Not quickly. Not loudly. It moved the way a crack moves through ice. You cannot see it moving, and then suddenly the damage is larger than you thought, and you realize it had been growing for some time already. 3 more rank commanders submitted formal objections to Firebase call assault assignments over the next 48 hours. Then 6 enlisted unit leaders, who did not have the standing to file the kind of formal document Frau had filed, submitted informal requests for medical reassignment. The medical grounds they listed were persistent sleep disruption, loss of appetite, and a feeling of unease that they could not describe more specifically than that. The military doctors who reviewed these requests found nothing physically wrong with any of them. They cleared them for duty and sent the paperwork back up the chain. The paperwork sat there. Dorovean looked at it on a Thursday morning and then looked at the deployment orders for the Second Army that he still had not signed and then looked at the wall of his office for a while. At Firebase call, word came through that the second Vectari assault had not materialized. Eli Ruiz was eating his morning ration when Briggs told them. He stopped chewing for a moment. "So they're not coming?" Lena Morse looked up from her notebook. "They're thinking," she said. Eli looked out through the doorway at the perimeter wall and the flat 10 plane beyond it. He had no way to know what thinking looked like from 2 armies worth of Vectari command personnel, but he supposed it looked like nothing from the outside. The plane was quiet. The sky was doing its morning thing before the purple set in. Somewhere under the broken armored vehicle, Owen Hart was helping the vehicle operator install the replacement tread part that had finally arrived on a supply drone that morning. Hart had no formal training in vehicle mechanics. He had watched several instructional videos the night before with complete attention and had then announced that he understood the process well enough to help. Nobody had stopped him. The sound of the work came in through the open door. Hart was singing, which by this point was just part of the ambient sound of the Firebase, like the hum of the power cells and the occasional wind off the plane. Connor came back from the comm room and sat at the folding table and finished his ration without speaking. Then he said, "Intel says their Second Army still hasn't moved. No one has a clean read on why." Silence for a moment. Owen Hart, from under the vehicle outside, said through the open door, "Smart of them." No one in the room argued with this. Seville was on his 8th report. Each one had been longer than the one before it. Each one had approached the same central question from a slightly different angle and had reached the edge of an answer and then stopped at the edge and looked over into it without being able to describe what was down there. He had more data than he had ever collected on a single subject in his career. He had the surveillance footage of the engagement, which he had reviewed over 40 times. He had Frau's 7-page refusal, which he had read more times than that. He had second-hand accounts from 36 soldiers who had been in Wave 1 and had agreed to speak with him. The interviews were the most valuable part and also the most difficult. He had asked each soldier to walk him through their experience of the engagement in sequence, with as much detail as they could recall. Most of them were willing. They were professional soldiers and they knew how to give an account. But at a specific point in almost every interview, something shifted. The soldier would reach a particular moment in their account, a different moment for each person, but with a recognizable shape in common, and their language would change. They would slow down. They would start using words like strange and unclear where before they had been precise. Some of them stopped speaking entirely for a few seconds and then started again on a sentence that did not connect to the previous one. They were not being evasive. They were trying to describe something that their vocabulary had not been built for. Seville had flagged this pattern in his 7th report. He had not been able to explain it. In his 8th report he changed his approach. Instead of asking the soldiers what they had seen, he asked them what they had felt. Most of them were uncomfortable with the question. The Vectari military did not build its training around the discussion of felt experience during engagements. Seville was patient and careful and he pushed gently, and most of them answered. A veteran soldier named Horu, who had fought in 4 campaigns and received 2 field commendations, said something that Seville wrote down exactly as it was spoken. He said, "It was not that they were not afraid. I could see that they were. It was that their being afraid did not change what they were doing. I could see both things at once. I did not know what to do with that. We have never trained for that because we have never needed to train for that." Everything we know about how to break an enemy's will is built on the idea that fear makes people stop. And they did not stop. Seville read this answer several times before moving on. He added it to his report with no commentary around it. He felt that commentary would make it smaller. Kayla Briggs received a formal communication request from the Vectari Intelligence Division on Day 6 of the standoff. The request was brief and precise. It asked for a direct channel with the human military intelligence liaison attached to Firebase call. Briggs showed it to Connor over coffee. Connor read it. He handed it back. "What do they want?" he said. "It says clarification on tactical doctrine and behavioral parameters," she said. Connor considered this. He drank his coffee. "So they want to know how we work." "That's what it sounds like." Connor was quiet for a moment. "Up to you," he said. Briggs spent the rest of the day thinking about it. She thought about what she would share and what she would hold back and what could not be communicated at all regardless of intent, because some things were not in any report, they were not in any training manual, they lived in specific people in specific moments and you could describe the surface of them but not what was underneath. She thought about Owen Hart moving across open ground without a weapon while the engagement was still running. She thought about Eli Ruiz's hands that had not shaken. She thought about Lena Morse checking the notebook before anything else. She sent her acceptance at 2,100 hours. She did not sleep well that night. Not because she was frightened. Because she was awake with the particular alertness of someone who is about to try to put a very large thing into very small words and is not sure it can be done. Frau sat in his new analysis post on a quiet afternoon and stared at a wall that had nothing on it. At the end of the shift he wrote something. Not a formal document. A personal note, saved only to his own files. He wrote, "They are not the same as us. I do not mean their biology. I mean the thing that happens inside a person before they choose to go forward. We have a word for this. It means, the cost of the action, weighed before you act. Every soldier knows this weight. All of our training is built around helping soldiers carry it. I do not think the humans at Firebase Call were carrying it when they fought. I think they had already set it down somewhere. Before the fight began. Quietly. Without anyone watching. And then they showed up empty-handed and moved through everything we sent at them and I stood at my display for 11 minutes and could not tell you why that was harder to face than the fire itself." He saved the note. He closed his terminal. He sat in the quiet room for a while longer. Then he went to find something to eat. The first conversation between Seville and Briggs lasted 3 hours. They met on a secure channel with a 2-second signal delay between them, which made the pauses in conversation slightly longer than natural. This suited both of them. Neither of them was in a hurry. The delay gave each person just enough extra time to be careful about what came next. Seville had prepared his questions over 2 full days. He had arranged them in careful order, the simpler, measurable things first, then the harder things that required more work to approach. He was a trained scientist before he was an intelligence officer and he had always worked this way. Build the foundation carefully, then build on top of it. His first questions were about physiology. Human pain tolerance. The point at which a human soldier typically stopped being able to function due to injury, compared with the equivalent point in Vectari military personnel. He had existing data on this but there were gaps, and he wanted Briggs to fill them. Briggs gave him the numbers straight. She did not round them up. She knew he could cross-reference them against independent medical literature and she had no reason to give him anything other than the truth. The numbers were significant. She watched his face through the comm feed. He was very good at keeping his expression steady. He was not quite good enough. "Your pain tolerance range is considerably wider than ours," he said. "Yes," she said. "This is partly biological." "Partly," she said. Seville wrote something on his tablet. "What accounts for the rest?" Briggs thought about how to say it. "Practice," she said. Seville wrote that down too. He looked at it for a moment. Then he moved to the next question. The second session covered decision-making speed under fire. Seville had reviewed the Firebase Call engagement footage many times and had specific timestamps he wanted to discuss. He pulled them up one by one and walked Briggs through them carefully. He was not trying to trap her. He genuinely wanted to understand, and the footage was the clearest record he had of the thing he could not explain. He paused on a timestamp from the North Sector, 0347:12. He described what he saw. A figure moving between cover positions along a route that did not follow any logical assessment path. The information a soldier would need to verify that route was safe had not been available at the moment of movement. This individual, Seville said. He is moving before his threat assessment could reasonably be complete. Briggs looked at the timestamp. That's Ruiz, she said. How did he determine the path was clear? He didn't, she said. He determined a path. Whether it's clear is a result you find out after. Seville was quiet for a moment. He wrote for a while. He reread what he had written. He seemed to be deciding whether to push further in this direction or try something different. He pushed further. This requires a tolerance for not knowing that I am having difficulty modeling, he said. In our training structure, a soldier moves forward when the forward direction has been assessed as survivable. The assessment comes before the movement. I know, Briggs said. Your soldiers seem to have reversed this. Briggs was quiet for just a beat. It's not reversed, she said. The same sequence is running. It just runs faster than you can track it from outside. Seville looked at her. He wrote something. He did not appear satisfied with the answer. He also did not appear to have a better question to replace it with. He moved on. By the fourth session, Seville had stopped using his prepared list. He was following threads as they appeared, going where the conversation led, which was unusual for him. Briggs noticed the change. She said nothing about it. She adjusted. He asked her about Connor Boyle. She said, what specifically? Seville pulled up a clip. He described it carefully. Timestamp 0412:50. Boyle was in cover behind a section of collapsed perimeter wall, receiving fire from two different directions simultaneously. In the 7 seconds before he moved out of cover to shift his position, he did something that Seville had watched the clip more than 20 times trying to name accurately. He looked, Seville said. Not at his tactical display. Not at the incoming fire. Not at anything specific. He looked at nothing for approximately 4 seconds. And then he moved. Briggs nodded slowly. He was adjusting, she said. To what? To what was happening? Seville stared at her. That is not a sufficient explanation. No, she said. It isn't. It's also the whole answer. Seville wrote it down. The 2-second signal delay sat between them like a presence in the conversation. The silence stretched a little longer than it needed to and neither of them hurried it. I want to ask about the medic, he said. Briggs waited. Your medic left his assigned position during the engagement to reach an injured soldier. He moved without a weapon. Through open, contested ground. Under active fire. Seville looked directly at the feed. By every tactical measure I can apply, this was not a rational decision. Owen knows that, Briggs said. Then why? Briggs looked at him through the screen. Because the alternative was letting someone die. Soldiers die in engagements, Seville said. This is not a surprise condition. This is the premise of the operation. Owen knows that too, Briggs said. She let it sit. The 2-second delay stretched it further. Seville did not write anything for a long time. He looked at his notes. He looked at the feed. He looked at his notes again. He moved on. But he kept coming back to Owen Hart in every session after that. Small references. Peripheral questions. The way you keep turning back toward a door you have not been able to open. Seville spent 4 days writing his 12th report after the final session. The previous 11 reports had each been substantial documents. The 12th was 11 pages of organized data followed by 3 short paragraphs. He wrote those 3 paragraphs 12 times before he had the version he would send. He deleted entire drafts. He crossed out lines that were accurate but not precise enough, which is a different problem and a worse one. When he was finished he sent it to Dorovean's office without requesting a follow-up briefing. He had said what he had to say in the document. He did not think a meeting would add anything. Dorovean read it with the door to his office closed. He read it straight through without stopping. Then he sat at his desk for a long time and looked at the viewport without registering what was outside of it. He signed the orders pulling the Vecteri forces back from the firebase call operational area 3 hours later. Briggs received an unredacted copy of the report through the diplomatic channel on a Tuesday. She was in a transport heading back to the main Colonial Command Center. The transport was loud and she had to hold the tablet close. She read through the data sections at a reasonable pace. When she reached the 3 paragraphs, she slowed down. She read them twice. She put the tablet down on her knee and watched the landscape moving past outside the window. The land out here was flat and pale and went on for a long way. There was not much to look at. She looked at it anyway. Then she picked the tablet back up, took a still image of the 3 paragraphs, and sent it directly to Lena Morse with no message attached. No explanation. No framing. Just the image. Morse received it that evening at the firebase. She was sitting cross-legged on her bunk in the quiet hour before sleep. She read the 3 paragraphs once, slowly. Then she sat still for a while. She opened her notebook and wrote for some time before closing it. Later, she took the notebook to where Connor was sitting and read the 3 paragraphs aloud to him. Connor listened without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the middle distance. He said. He picked up his paperback novel and found his page. Lena went back to hers. From the next room, Owen Hart, who had heard the whole thing without anyone telling him to listen, stopped singing for one short moment. Just a moment. He stood still. Then the song started up again, a little quieter than before, and the firebase settled into its usual evening sounds, and the sky outside went purple the way it always did now, and everything was the same as it had been, and also the stand-down was not loud. These things never are. The official ceasefire communication came through at 0800 on a Thursday. It was written in careful diplomatic language with 7 subclauses and references to 4 different border treaties identified by number. It was 11 paragraphs long. All 11 paragraphs said, in a formal and considered way, that everyone was going home. Briggs read it to Connor's unit at the morning meal. When she finished, Eli Ruiz asked if he could have the rest of the rations that nobody was eating. He was given them. He ate without ceremony and did not say anything about the ceasefire or what it meant or how he felt about it. He was 22 and from Albuquerque, and he had learned in the past 2 weeks that there were things worth talking about and things that were better carried quietly, and he was still figuring out which was which. The battalion that had been 2 days out was now heading in the other direction, back to their permanent post. They sent a brief calm congratulating firebase call on the engagement. Connor sent back 2 sentences. Lena Morse wrote the 2 sentences because Connor said he did not have the right words and she usually did. The ceasefire held through the first day. Then the second. On day 5, Briggs confirmed that the Vecteri had pulled all forces back past the second border marker. Not just the assault units. All of them. The whole operational presence rolled back in orderly columns until there was only empty plain between the firebase and the horizon. Eli sent his mother a voice memo that evening. This one was the longest he had sent since leaving for the deployment. He had not told her the details of what had happened, operational security, and also some things were not for voice memos to mothers, but he told her that the stretch they had been through was over. He told her it had been hard in ways he would explain better in person. He told her the moon was still doing the purple sky thing and that he was going to miss it a little when they shipped out, which surprised him because he had not expected to miss anything about this place. He did not cry during the memo. He cried a little after he sent it, sitting outside on the same supply crate he had used before the engagement. The sky was doing the thing. There was no one else outside. He let it run for a couple of minutes and then stopped and sat until he felt like himself again. Then he went back in. On the Vecteri side, the withdrawal was disciplined and precise. Doravayan had made certain of that before anything else. Whatever had happened, the Empire's armies would not stumble back from it like something broken. They moved with the same order they had arrived with, and they kept their heads straight. Frau watched the withdrawal from his analysis post. He was still there, still waiting for word on whether he would be returned to active command. He had not asked anyone about the timeline. He had found that he did not feel urgency about it the way he thought he would. He had spent his days in the analysis post reading Sievel's reports in order, starting from the first. He had read through all 12 of them twice. He was on his third pass. He kept reaching the 3 paragraphs at the end of the 12th and reading them again and then sitting with them. The first paragraph was about physical tolerance. It laid out carefully what the data showed about how far into injury and distress a human soldier could operate, compared with what was normal for VEC personnel. The numbers were large. Frau had reviewed similar data before in other contexts. The numbers were not the part that kept him returning. The second paragraph was about the foundation. It said, all military doctrine, across every civilization that has built a military, rests on a single assumption. The assumption is that living things, when they understand the cost of going forward, will be influenced by that understanding. The survival calculation will run and the result of the calculation will change behavior. This is why force works. This is why the threat of force works. This is how every engagement in recorded VEC history has been resolved. You raise the cost until the cost becomes louder than the order, and the enemy stops. The third paragraph was short. It said, human special forces have not eliminated the survival calculation. They still run it. They understand the cost completely. What they have done, through training, through experience, through something in their nature or history that we do not yet have a model for, is to complete the calculation before the engagement begins. They look at the cost clearly and fully, in private, before anyone is watching. They sit with it and they accept it. And then they arrive. Already finished with the hardest part. You cannot raise the cost for a person who has already paid. You cannot make the calculation louder for someone who has already done the math and moved past it. Our soldiers are not afraid of dying. They have all faced that. What they felt at Firebase Call was something they do not have a name for. It is the particular feeling of standing across from a person who has already said goodbye to themselves this morning, quietly, without drama, and came here anyway. There is no counter-doctrine for this. We have checked. Frau had read the third paragraph more times than he could count. Each time he read it he felt the 11 minutes in front of the optics feed. The feeling of watching Eli Ruiz move and being unable to find the framework. He understood it now. It was not a better feeling for being understood. The firebase began packing down on the 6th day after the ceasefire. The armored vehicle, its tread now properly installed, moving on its own power for the first time in weeks, was scheduled to be driven to the main depot. The supply structures would be catalogued and sealed. The 3 buildings would stay for whoever came next. Eli Ruiz stood beside the vehicle on the last evening and put his hand flat on the hull. It was warm from sitting in the afternoon light. He stood there for a while without taking a picture or saying anything, just letting the warmth come through his palm. Owen Hart came out of the medical building carrying 2 packets of terrible coffee and handed one to Eli without asking. They stood together and drank it and looked at the perimeter wall and the quiet plain beyond it and the sky going purple the way it always did now at this hour. Neither of them talked. The coffee was bad. The sky was doing its thing. Inside, Lena Morse was closing her notebook for the last time at this posting. She smoothed the cover. She put the rubber band around it. She put it in her pack and closed the pack. Connor came in from the comm room and found her standing there with her pack on. "Ready," he said. "Yes," she said. They walked out together into the last of the evening light. 6 weeks after the ceasefire, Sievel filed one more document with the Administrative Office of the VEC Intelligence Division. It was not a report. It was a personal request for authorization to conduct an extended observational study of human military culture, specifically the Tier 1 Special Forces units, over an open-ended timeline with no fixed end date. The request made no tactical argument. It did not claim the research would make the VEC military more effective or better prepared for future engagements. It did not frame itself in any of the usual terms that resource allocation requests were expected to use. The last line of the request read, "I want to understand how a person learns to set the weight down before the work begins. I want to know whether this is something that can be taught, or whether it is something each person must find alone, in the dark, without help. I am filing this request knowing it falls outside standard intelligence objectives. I am filing it regardless." The request moved through 3 different review offices. All 3 passed it upward without adding a comment. Dorovean saw it on a Friday afternoon. He read the last line. He read it again. He approved it, signed it, and sent it back down the chain. He did not add a note. He closed his terminal and stood up and went to find something to eat and tried not to think about the 3 paragraphs he had memorized without meaning to, or about the men on the steps of a small firebase reading a paper book in the purple evening light with 2 armies 4 days away, unhurried, 1 page at a time. He tried. He walked through the long corridor of the command ship and the engines hummed and the lights were the same as they always were, and out of every viewport the colonial border moved slowly away behind him, and the moon with its strange sky got smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among many, and he watched it go. He was still watching when it disappeared.